January 10, 1860 is yet another day for the workers in the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts. Christmas holidays are gone, and the long working hours are back. There are more than 600 people inside the mill, men, women, and even children. Entire families are employed. With 50 cents per day wages, all hands welcome the work to put the food on the table. For the children of mid-19th century New England, there's no playtime, only 12-hour shifts. We're in the gloomy ages of the Industrial Revolution, and things are going to get even darker on this day. At 4:45 p.m. on that cold January afternoon, just 15 minutes before the end of the work shift, the Pemberton Mill suddenly collapsed. Without warning, the 5-story brick building pancaked downward. All 5 floors fell in on themselves in a matter of seconds. Over 600 workers, standing at their machines, finishing the day's work, fell into a massive pile of rubble. They were crushed by falling machinery, trapped under broken beams, buried under bricks and debris. The collapse was catastrophic and instantaneous. Those who survived the initial fall found themselves trapped in a twisted maze of wreckage, pinned under machinery that weighed thousands of pounds, surrounded by the dead and dying, in complete darkness. Rescuers rushed to the scene and began frantically digging through the debris, pulling out survivors. Many were seriously injured, but alive. As night fell, they worked by lantern light, hearing cries for help from deep within the rubble. By 9 p.m., 4 hours after the collapse, rescuers had saved hundreds. Hope was growing that most would survive. Then disaster struck again. A rescue worker's lantern ignited spilled oil from the mill's machinery. Within seconds, fire raced through the debris pile. The wreckage, full of cotton, wood, and oil, burned with horrifying speed. People still trapped alive in the rubble were burned to death, screaming for help while rescuers stood helpless, unable to reach them through the flames. The final death toll was at least 145 people, some crushed in the collapse, others burned alive in the fire. Many victims were children as young as 10 years old. This is the story of the Pemberton Mill disaster, when a factory built on greed collapsed, killing hundreds of exploited workers in one of America's worst industrial disasters. Part 1. The Industrial Revolution and the Pemberton Mill. Lawrence, Massachusetts, 1860. Lawrence was a booming industrial city built around textile mills. The mills produced cotton cloth using water power from the Merrimack River. By 1860, Lawrence was one of the centers of America's Industrial Revolution. The Pemberton Mill. Built in 1853, the Pemberton Mill was a massive 5-story brick building, 280 feet long, 84 feet wide, 5 stories tall, housed hundreds of power looms and spinning machines, employed over 600 workers, produced cotton cloth. But the mill was built on the cheap, corners were cut, inferior materials used, safety ignored. The workers, the exploited. Over 600 people worked at Pemberton, men, women, and children. Many were Irish immigrants fleeing famine, entire families employed. Ages ranged from 10 years old to elderly. Working conditions, 12 to 14-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Wages, 50 cents per day, barely enough to survive. Dangerous machinery with no safety guards, deafening noise, poor ventilation, lint-filled air. Children worked the same hours as adults. No labor laws, no protections, no unions. This was the Industrial Revolution. Workers were expendable. Profit was everything. The building problems. From the start, the Pemberton Mill had structural issues. Built quickly and cheaply. Inferior materials used. Foundation inadequate. Support columns too thin for the weight they carried. Heavy machinery on upper floors. Thousands of pounds of cast iron looms. Cracks had appeared in walls. Workers had complained about vibrations and noises. Management ignored warnings. The mill was a disaster waiting to happen. Part 2. January 10, 1860. 4:45 p.m., the collapse. A normal workday. January 10, 1860 was a cold Tuesday. Over 600 workers were inside the Pemberton Mill finishing their 12-hour shift, just 15 minutes until quitting time at 5 p.m. Workers standing at looms and spinning machines, the roar of machinery, tired after a long day, looking forward to going home, children exhausted. 4:45 p.m., the collapse. Without any warning, the Pemberton Mill collapsed. What happened? The support columns, overloaded and inadequate, failed. The building pancaked downward. All 5 floors fell in on themselves in seconds. The entire structure was a massive pile of rubble. Over 600 people fell with the floors. The physics of the collapse. Each floor crashed down onto the one below, creating a domino effect. Thousands of tons of brick, wood, machinery, and people, compressed into a 2-story high pile of wreckage. The immediate aftermath. Chaos and horror, a dust cloud obscuring everything, sounds of screaming, crying, moaning, the smell of oil and blood, complete devastation. Those inside, some killed instantly, crushed by falling machinery or debris, some trapped but alive, pinned under beams, machinery, rubble. Some with horrific injuries, crushed limbs, broken bones, internal injuries. Some miraculously uninjured but trapped. Darkness, confusion, terror. Outside, witnesses heard the deafening crash, saw the dust cloud, realized the mill had collapsed, knew hundreds were inside. Within minutes, rescuers arrived. Factory workers from other mills, townspeople, anyone who could help, began frantically digging through debris, pulling out survivors, using bare hands, crowbars, axes. The challenge: wreckage was unstable, could collapse further. Machinery weighed thousands of pounds, had to carefully move debris to avoid injuring trapped people. Working against time, the injured were dying. As night fell, by 6 p.m. it was dark. Rescuers worked by lantern light, hundreds of lanterns illuminating the scene. Could hear voices from deep in the rubble. "Help me, I'm trapped, please get me out." Desperate to reach them before they died. Progress. By 9 p.m., 4 hours after collapse, rescuers had pulled out hundreds of survivors, many injured but alive, taken to hospitals and homes. The death toll was tragic but lower than feared. Hope was growing that most would survive. Then came the fire. 9 p.m., the fire ignites. A rescue worker's lantern was knocked over or dropped. The lantern broke, oil spilled, flames ignited. The wreckage was a tinderbox, soaked in machine oil, full of cotton fibers, highly flammable, wooden beams, and debris. The fire spread instantly. Within minutes, flames raced through the debris pile, fed by oil and cotton, grew into a massive blaze. Rescuers forced back by the heat, unable to reach trapped survivors. The horror. People still trapped alive in the rubble could see the flames approaching, screaming for help, begging to be freed. Rescuers trying desperately to reach them, but the fire was too fast, too hot. Witnesses described hearing screams of trapped workers as the fire reached them, begging to be killed rather than burned alive. Some rescuers shot trapped people to spare them burning to death. The most horrific scenes imaginable. The fire burned through the night, consuming the wreckage, incinerating trapped victims. Nothing could stop it. By morning, only ashes remained. Part 4: The Death Toll and Aftermath. The final count. At least 145 people died in the Pemberton Mill disaster. Some crushed in the initial collapse, others burned alive in the fire. Exact number uncertain, records incomplete, possibly as many as 150 to 200 dead. Who they were: men, women, children, ages 10 to 60 plus, entire families wiped out. Irish immigrants, New England workers, the poor and exploited. Among the dead, children as young as 10 who should have been in school, mothers and daughters who worked side by side, fathers and sons, people who survived the collapse but burned in the fire. The injured. Over 200 people seriously injured, crushed limbs requiring amputation, severe burns, broken bones, internal injuries. Many disabled for life. No workers' compensation, no support. The survivors. Those who escaped faced survivor's guilt, trauma from seeing friends and family die, economic hardship, no work, no wages, injuries that ended their ability to work. Part 5. The investigation and legacy. The investigation. Authorities investigated the collapse. The causes identified. 1. Structural failures. The building was poorly designed and constructed. Support columns were too weak for the weight of machinery. Inferior materials used to cut costs. Foundation inadequate. 2. Overloading. Heavy cast iron machinery on upper floors. Weight exceeded the building's capacity. Vibrations from the machinery weakened the structure over time. 3. Known defects. Cracks had been visible in walls. Workers had complained about structural problems. Management ignored warnings. Profit prioritized over safety. The blame. Who was responsible? The mill owners. Built cheaply to maximize profit. Ignored safety concerns. Overloaded the building. Exploited workers for minimal wages. The builders. Used substandard materials. Cut corners. Created a structurally unsound building. The lack of regulations. No building codes or safety inspections. No labor laws protecting workers. Laissez-faire capitalism with no oversight. Workers had no recourse. No one was held criminally responsible. This was the 19th century. Worker deaths were considered unfortunate but acceptable costs of doing business. The public reaction. The Pemberton Mill disaster shocked America. Front-page news across the nation, raised awareness of industrial dangers, sparked early labor reform discussions, but real change would take decades. The long-term impact. The Pemberton Mill disaster contributed to growing awareness of workers' rights, early labor movement organizing, calls for building safety regulations, recognition that child labor was exploitation. Though meaningful reforms didn't come until the early 1900s. The legacy. The Pemberton Mill disaster represents the human cost of the Industrial Revolution, the exploitation of workers, including children, the dangers of prioritizing profit over safety, one of America's worst industrial disasters. It remains a reminder of what happens when workers are treated as disposable and safety is ignored. Conclusion. On January 10, 1860, over 600 workers, men, women, and children, were inside the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, finishing a 12-hour shift for 50 cents a day. At 4:45 p.m., just 15 minutes before quitting time, the 5-story mill collapsed without warning. The building pancaked, crushing everyone inside under tons of brick, machinery, and debris. Rescuers worked frantically, pulling hundreds of survivors from the wreckage. Hope was growing. Then, at 9 p.m., fire broke out. The wreckage, soaked in oil, full of cotton, became an inferno. People still trapped alive in the rubble burned to death, screaming for help that couldn't reach them. At least 145 people died, many of them children as young as 10. They died because the mill was built cheaply with inferior materials. Structural defects were ignored. Heavy machinery overloaded weak floors. Profit was prioritized over safety. Workers were expendable in the Industrial Revolution. Rest in peace to the 145-plus victims of the Pemberton Mill. You were children who should have been in school. You were mothers and fathers trying to feed your families. You were immigrants seeking a better life. You worked 12-hour days for 50 cents a day. You died crushed under machinery or burned alive because mill owners cared more about profit than your lives. You deserved better. You deserved safe working conditions. You deserved childhood. You deserved to go home at 5 p.m. January 10, 1860, the day the Pemberton Mill collapsed and the Industrial Revolution showed its cruelest face. 145-plus dead, countless injured, workers exploited, then killed.